Teacher resignations, school violence, mass shootings, and human trafficking are at the all-time highest rates in U.S. history in public schools. Welcome to Freedom Alive. According to the National Education Association, a staggering 55% of teachers are considering leaving their jobs earlier than they had planned. 55%! And this is true regardless of age or years teaching. Rocky Malloy is the founder and CEO of the National School Chaplain Association. Rocky joins us on this episode to share the importance of why every public school needs a chaplain on campus. I'm thankful to again be joined by our co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, teachers experience the same stress levels as first responders, but where do they turn for spiritual care?
Well, I think it's a great idea to have chaplains in the public schools, and now you have some states like Florida and Texas and other states that are passing laws specifically stating that chaplains can be in the public and the public charter schools as well. Rocky Malloy, the founder and CEO of National School Chaplain Association, already has a lot of experience in many other countries. 23 countries, they have over 30,000, around 30,500 schools that they have chaplains in. And in other places around the world, they have chaplains in more schools because you haven't had this distortion that we've experienced here in the United States regarding the First Amendment Establishment Clause since 1971. And that distortion, by the way, came to an end in 2022. But we've had that period of 51 years where the First Amendment has wrongly been used to try to cleanse religion, particularly Christianity, from our public schools, whereas globally that's not the case.
Some remarkable insights. We cannot wait to bring it to you, but our Freedom Alert is next.
Governments pausing puberty blockers based on scientific evidence. At least 8 foreign governments and 23 states have recently halted or limited the prescription of puberty blockers and hormones for children as scientific evidence exposes these drugs as unnecessary, ineffective, and dangerous. While the 23 states have enacted legislation outright banning administration of these drugs for minors, many leading European countries have expressed caution and doubt about their safety and efficacy and are changing the way they treat children with gender confusion. The evidence is clear. Gender confusion is often linked to underlying mental health issues and can be treated through counseling. There is no need to give a child puberty blockers and hormone treatments, which can irreversibly damage them for life. The medical community needs to get back to do no harm and stop mutilating children.
Up next, Matt's interview with Rocky Malloy.
I want to welcome to Freedom Alive Rocky Malloy. He is the founder and CEO of National School Chaplain Association. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Rocky.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, Rocky, tell us about what the National School Chaplain Association is. What's your mission and what do you do?
Our mission is for God, prayer, and faith to be back in public education. Currently, we work in 23 countries. We have chaplains in approximately 30,500 schools, and it's that experience that we're bringing to the United States.
So you're already in 23 countries outside of the United States.
That's correct. School chaplaincy is common in most places.
So did this organization, a National School Chaplain Association, start focusing originally on chaplaincy in the United States, or was it focused on chaplains outside of the United States?
Actually, it started in Bolivia, where we were working to stop the victimization of children. We learned that if children were in school, they were less likely to have their organs harvested and be sold as slaves. So we started a program that included text, and there was different things that happened, so the text had to get separated from the witness, but chaplains became a way to keep God in school. And just really for this interview, children love Jesus, and so when Jesus was in school, they stayed in school and they stayed out of harm's way.
So in Bolivia, then, if the children drop out of school, they don't go to school, then they're more susceptible to sexual exploitation, being sold as slaves, being sold so that their organs could be harvested as well. And so your mission originally was to try to keep those kids in school by bringing Jesus to them in the public schools or in the school systems.
That's exactly right. It is important to mention that the Latin American countries and Africa and Europe where we work do not operate under the separation clause of the First Amendment of the United States. So in those countries, it's completely legal for Jesus to be represented by chaplains in schools.
That's interesting. So 23 countries. Now you're in more than 30,000 or 30,500 schools. That includes the schools around the world as well. And what about the United States? How many schools are you in the United States, and what's your mission here in the U.S.?
Well, the recent legislation in Texas and Florida is so new that school districts are still getting used to the idea of having chaplains. We only have a handful of chaplains actually working in public education in Texas, and we're looking forward for the same thing happening in Florida, but on a much larger scale.
So we had a law that was passed in Florida and signed by Governor Ron DeSantis in 2024 that indicates that chaplains can go into the public and charter schools. Of course, they could always go into Christian private schools, but they can go into the public and the charter schools in Florida. That's a law that was signed in 2024. And then also you have a Texas Chaplain Act that was enacted in 2023 that allows Texas schools to use safety funds to pay for chaplains there as well to work in mental health roles. And volunteer chaplains will also be allowed in the schools within Texas as well.
That's correct. The big difference between Texas and Florida is that the Texas law provides that, or states that chaplains can be hired or allowed to volunteer. In Florida right now, it's only volunteers.
So if you're going to pay a chaplain, it would be outside private funding. That would pay the chaplain to come there, but they would be volunteering their services to that particular school in Florida. The school itself doesn't have the budget or the resources authorized to actually fund the chaplain's services?
Well, the budget question could get into another conversation, but the state, it made a non-fiscal bill. So there's no financial requirements from the state to obligate or allow for school districts in Florida to pay for a chaplain.
Your website is campuschaplains.org. What will people find when they go to your website?
Campuschaplains.org will give people information about what school chaplaincy is about. We do offer training and certification for people that would like to offer that to their school districts. Many school districts like the idea that someone be trained and certified to know how to operate in a school. Florida is a mandatory report state, so there's some situations that protocols have to be followed. And we also maintain relationships with our chaplains with monthly updates and training, continuing education, and school districts also like that.
So, for example, if someone is in Florida where this law was recently passed and they wanted to be a chaplain in one of their public or charter schools in their vicinity, I guess they could go to your website, campuschaplains.org, and find out more about your ministry, get some training. What would their next step be? How would they go about this process?
Well, the first thing they would do would fill in a form, and that would allow us to run. We do an international, an FBI national, FBI in your case, Florida, and then a forensic social media, very thorough background check. Then we would ask for a letter of actually endorsement from their church, an employer, non-family members. We need to get a great background so schools know that chaplains have been thoroughly investigated, and there's very little likelihood that there's some type of hidden behavior that would be, dangerous for children. Then we provide them with 80 hours of training from a university recognized by the Department of Education. And then there's some safety training provided by the FBI and the Red Cross. And if all that goes well and they pass all the courses, then they're certified.
So there's a huge need for Christian-based, Spirit-filled, Bible-believing chaplains, whether it's in ICU rooms and certainly in the public schools. What kinds of situations are you dealing with right now with regards to states? We have Texas, we have Florida. What other states are possibilities where these laws might be passed?
Louisiana is very close. It's passed in both houses and it's in reconciliation. Alabama it's on the floor of the House. Iowa, Nebraska, Ohio, South Carolina are all states where it's still active. Several states filed legislation this year, including Pennsylvania and Maryland, but the language was they needed some of your counsel. They put language in there that made it susceptible to be challenged. We want laws passed that, like Texas and Florida, that go right through with no challenge.
Rocky, what drew you in your calling to become a chaplain?
Well, you know what? I was a merchant marine officer, and I was working in the Sandinista War. That was the civil war in Nicaragua. Yeah. And you know what? I was working with some soldiers and things, and there was children around. It was guerrilla war, so there's children around, and really I just ignored the kids. It wasn't part of my, it was just, we just didn't pay any attention to them. And then we moved into a place that was more engulfed in combat. And I realized these children had no idea they were in war. Now, this is a very primitive place. No roads, no electricity, no plumbing, anything like that. And the communists used to incinerate artillery on civilian targets. So children, it was just horrific things happening to little kids. And I saw things happen in children. I thought it was the UN or something. And then it turned out it wasn't. It was traffickers hauling these orphans away. And it just had just a huge impact on me. So pretty much it looked like at that point, I didn't realize that at the time, but I dedicated my life to keep children out of victimization. And that meant keeping them in school. And in school, they needed to do well. And so chaplains have been very successful at increasing graduation rates by reducing teen pregnancies, violence, and what's probably the biggest impact is suicide. We have a database of 27 million people. In those 30,000 schools, there's not one reported suicide. Now, that people have a hard time believing that. And if it was 5 or 10 or whatever it was, I would report it. But that's what it is. And so just think of the impact it makes on a student body when there's a man or woman of God that represents the righteousness of Christ for them to open up and discuss these things with.
That's amazing. That's what I was going to ask you is what are you seeing the impact of the chaplains across the world and now starting to grow in the United States? What kinds of things are you encountering? And are you going to encounter different things here in the United States, for example, than you are encountering globally?
You know what? Even though we do work in like European countries and things that have demographics similar to the United States, it's pretty much the same. Children are dealing with issues that when you and I were growing up, we never even thought about. And so these are life-changing. Just think like a young boy or girl goes onto blockers and they become sterile. They're sterilized. The dream of being a mommy or daddy goes away, and the school systems are pushing children into this gender confusion in their young teens. And they really, because I just had a daughter finish high school, they don't really trust the system. They're not sure what to trust, but the chaplain is seen as a trusted person because all conversations with that chaplain are confidential unless it's required for them to be reported.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned, the gender confusion and the puberty blockers, one of the things that is happening here and certainly in other places in greater or lesser extent around the world is this LGBTQ agenda, this idea that all your problems can be solved no matter what it is. Maybe you're on the autism spectrum, maybe you're anxious, maybe you have depression, anxiety, maybe you have body image issues, self-confidence, whatever it may be. Maybe you've been bullied. It doesn't matter what those issues are. They're not really dealt with. But how to fix those, they're being told, well, puberty blockers. You're just born in the wrong body. Your problem is you're just born in the wrong body. So let's fix it by giving you puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, opposite-sex hormones, and then eventually mutilating surgery. I know in Montgomery County, Maryland, the largest school district in Maryland, they have boasted that there was a 582% increase in what they call gender non-conforming students. These are students who do not accept their biological sex for whatever reason. They're called gender non-conforming, a 582% increase. Why is that? Well, it's not because of just innate things that are happening. It's because the school is pushing this idea. But as a chaplain, you can be there to talk to people on a regular basis, become their friends, and talk to them about life issues.
Matt, that is so critical that students have a source of truth. I know that's what you talk about a lot on your show, and you're trying to bring people to the reality of the liberties we have and to operate in that. And the thing is that, for instance, in the Florida bill, the Satanic Temple came against the governor saying they were going to flood the schools with all these chaplains, even though they have no chaplains. They're on record for saying they have no chaplains. Then there's not even their nature to have. I mean, it's ridiculous that people even believe that. But those are the people that are concerned that a God witness gets into school because they're grooming children. They're feeding off these children. And a big number that these schools are not reporting is the suicide rate. 50% of children that start on this path that cross a certain threshold kill themselves. So one reason there's this massive pandemic of children killing themselves is that they're gender confused and they wake up one morning no longer wanting to live in the opposite sex body, and it's just horrific. And that's the numbers that should be reported.
Yeah, what is the? I totally agree with you, Rocky. Instead of addressing the underlying issue, whatever they're dealing with, they push them down this very destructive path, and then the children realize they still have the issue. In fact, it's maybe worse because it's not dealt with. And then they realize they've just damaged their body by having these drugs or even surgery, like Chloe Cole, for example. Having drugs, puberty blockers, opposite sex, in this case, testosterone hormones, and then a total mastectomy by the age of 16. And then realized by the time she gets 18, she was lied to. She was duped. That wasn't the issue. It wasn't the problem. But you know what? Now she's mutilated her body and caused significant harm to her body. And so people now, when they go back to those sources that advise them to go down this path, they abandon them. So critical that chaplains are there like yourself. What's the difference for those that are watching between, say, a chaplain like yourself or someone like yourself on a school campus and a school counselor that the school may already have there hired on site?
Well, I think it's very important to realize is that without the spiritual cares provided by a chaplain, healthy children go to school and actually get mental illness. Schools are creating children with mental illness because they're not providing spiritual care. So, and it's very important to understand there's different kinds of counselors. There's academic counselors that help children select what type of subjects they need to graduate and graduate with what they want to do for later in life, and licensed professional counselors or family counselors that actually are mental health professionals. Big difference there. So when a child goes to a mental health professional, even though across the United States, that's 15 minutes average in 4 years in high school. So it's not like they're going to see this person on a regular basis. Let's talk about guilt. Depression is generally identified with some type of guilt. So this professional goes, you've got guilt. That's it. take medicine or go find something. But the chaplain can pray with that young person to forgive themselves or someone else, to alleviate the guilt and therefore actually resolve that issue.
Have you seen situations in some of the foreign countries, for example, where you have children going down this road, or they have a very difficult time with their parents, and as a result of the chaplain intervening, working with these young people in the 30+ thousand schools that you're in, that there's been a transformation of the child that actually repairs the child-parent relationship?
Well, there's a thing called adverse childhood experiences, which is almost exclusively damage that happens to the child because of the parents. Not all the time, but for the most part. And so, yes, one of the chaplain's jobs or responsibility is, as much as possible, reconciliation between the student and the parent. Sometimes, if the parents are, they're just doing stuff that's just so ungodly that they need to save the child or protect the child and get them out of that environment. But there's just been, you can imagine with the scale of the operation we work on, there is just thousands of wonderful stories of reconciliation, because the children many times forget the parent was involved in abuse when they were young, and so that's the only thing they know. So when the chaplain comes on board, they help the child and the parent come together and reconcile through really a relationship with Jesus. Then that's how it works overseas. Now in America, we're going to have to navigate what that means in this primarily secular society and operating in the legalities of First Amendment clause. I got to be very careful with that, because I get attacked all the time that we're going to go into schools and operate like we do overseas.
Well, certainly I think you have, since 2022, we've talked about it on this program before, there's been a huge shift at the United States Supreme Court. The 1971 Lemon versus Kurtzman case has been overturned. Thanks to a case that we were working on, 9-0, Shurtleff versus City of Boston, that was also cited in the Coach Kennedy case. Our case came down in May. Coach Kennedy's came down the very next month in June. As a result, those two cases overruled this 1971 Lemon test. And that's the particular case that groups like Freedom from Religion Foundation and others like them, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, used to try to scare schools into stopping Christmas celebrations or perhaps even chaplains on site. That is now gone. And, the Supreme Court now says that we interpret the First Amendment Establishment Clause consistent with its historical meaning and purpose, which is amazing, which is what we've always been arguing since we founded Liberty Counsel in 1989. But it gives you and others a lot more freedom, because having a chaplain come into school and be able to provide counsel to these young people is an amazing, incredible opportunity, and it's certainly not in violation of the Constitution in any respect whatsoever. So what you're doing is an amazing ministry. Rocky, I think that every person listening here ought to contact their churches, go to their pastor, and talk to them about your organization, National School Chaplain Association, and the website is campuschaplains.org, to suggest the idea that the church should adopt a school and pray for and find someone who is called to be a chaplain, put them in touch with your organization, and have chaplains in every one of the public and charter schools in their area.
That's the goal, a chaplain on every campus. Here's the big difference that a chaplain makes. It's not really obvious. When a chaplain shows up, the teachers change their behavior. It's like somebody's watching what's going on. And a lot of teachers just kind of go with it. They don't want to cause trouble. But when a chaplain shows up, stuff they know is wrong, pornography in the library, all this gender confusion and all this other stuff, the teacher, it arrests really bad behavior, and they just stop doing it. So it shocks the system. And that's what these really demonic groups are terrified of, is a God witness showing up and arresting the kind of behavior they've controlled for 60 years.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing a great work, Rocky. Rocky is the founder and CEO of National School Chaplain Association, and their website is campuschaplains.org. That's campuschaplains.org. I encourage you to check it out. And again, pray about this. Talk to your pastor, your church leaders, and ask them to pray about it and adopt a school. Adopt it through prayer. Find somebody in your church or your community who has a call for this. Put them in touch with the National School Chaplain Association. And the vision, as Rocky says, a chaplain in every school. What a transformation that would make in our schools around this nation. So instead of crying about the darkness, let's shine light in the darkness. And this is a great way to do it. Rocky, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt, I'm reminded of the incalculable implications of kicking God out of our schools over the last 60 years.
Yeah, it's had catastrophic effects, certainly in the United States. One of the interesting things that I found in this interview with Rocky is what's happening in foreign countries and how he actually started that the more you have the kids in the school, the more likely they're going to be protected, because if they drop out of school, they're more likely going to be sex trafficked, slave trafficked, and even amazingly harvested for their organs and put on the black market to sell their body parts. And so it's very important to have these kids in school, and to be able to provide counsel keeps these kids in school and has a transformative effect on the parents. So what a better time, what a better opportunity to bring this into the public schools, wherever your state is. Texas was the first to pass it. Florida was second. Other states are falling in line. And the National Association here of School Chaplains was very instrumental in those laws. So contact them, get that in your state, but also your churches. Get the churches involved, like I mentioned, to adopt a school. Pray for it. Find someone who's called to be a chaplain, get them trained, and get them in the schools. This is a great mission opportunity.
Absolutely. Fantastic idea to get your church involved and to adopt a school. There's such a stark difference about when many of us were in school and today, and the issues that these kids are facing. And to Rocky's point, when a counselor shows up, behavior changes. It is a big, big impact. In closing, remember Galatians 6, verses 9 and 10, which says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.